What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have something that I want to run by you guys, right? And what we're going to do in order to make this work is we're going to pull from a couple different sources. We're going to pull from a 1998 film called Lost in Space, which was actually a film based off an old 50s TV show, right? Danger, Will Robinson, Danger, right? You heard that? That's Lost in Space. We're going to pull from Jonathan Hickman's relaunch of the Ultimate Universe, and then we're going to pull from a theory video that I made like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And pulling all that stuff together, I think this is the actual plot to the Fantastic Four film. Right? Full transparency, I could be completely wrong here, but I think it's the actual plot to the Fantastic Four. So looking at this theory video that I had, the idea that I put forward was this. The Fantastic Four were an actual team that existed in the main Marvel universe back in the 60s. And they basically went on an exploratory mission. They ended up in the multiverse, and they kind of created a trail of breadcrumbs for them to find their way back to the native universe. During the events of Loki, when the multiverse snapped back, they lost their trail of breadcrumbs, and then they were trapped in the multiverse. And so my idea was, okay, so the plot of the Fantastic Four is that they're constantly jumping from one reality to the next, trying to find their way back to the main Marvel universe. And then that movie is going to somehow tie into the events of Kang Dynasty and so on and so forth, because I made that back before Marvel and Disney had parted ways with Jonathan Majors and then brought in the whole Doctor Doom thing. But now I want to switch over to Lost in Space. Now, again, Lost in Space was a 1998 film that was based off the old 50s TV show. The entire film centers around what's called the Robinson family. And the Robinson family is sent on a mission from Earth to explore other planets that are habitable for humanity because the Earth is becoming uninhabitable at that point in time. During this mission, Gary Oldman's character ends up sabotaging the robot, which destroys the guidance systems and the ship's hurtling towards the sun. And so they end up activating this experimental hyperdrive. Now, when they do, not only does the hyperdrive send them to the other side of the known universe, but if I remember correctly, they pass through a kind of fissure that also sends them 30 years into the future. Now, they don't know they're in the future, and they actually end up discovering, weird ships and whatnot. But the fact is, they end up crash landing on this strange planet. And they realize they're in the future when they meet Will Robinson, the son of the family, who's 30 years older, and he's the only survivor of the family. Now, you end up finding out that Gary Oldman's character had actually killed everybody except for Will, and that ultimately Will Robinson ends up helping the family get back to where they're supposed to be. But let's take that idea and let's apply it to the theory that I had, and then apply it to the Fantastic Four. And the reason for that is simple, because looking at the trailer, they do not look like a team that's lost in the multiverse. They look like a team that's living over there in some alternate reality. So what if they never got trapped in the multiverse? They're still trying to find a way back here because they're from Earth 616, but they made a home there. Well, I mean, how do you get from point A to point B? Well, you could simply just argue that as they were traveling into space, there was some kind of interstellar type thing, right? You guys know the plot of Interstellar. They go into space. They end up encountering this kind of sphere, right? This wormhole essentially out by Saturn, which had already been detected. They pass through it. They end up, light years away. Right. But instead of it being a place that just sends them to the other side of the known universe or the other side of the galaxy or what have you, it sends the Fantastic Four to an alternate reality. Now, why did they go through it? Well, I mean, I don't know. They're the Fantastic Four team. They explore, right? They saw a thing in space and they're like, let's go explore it, right? That's what we do. So they pass through it. They end up in an alternate reality, and there's basically no real way for them to get back. And so they settle there. And that's why they're on this Earth. They're just living here. And so at this point, I want to invoke Jonathan Hickman's reboot of the Ultimate Universe. And no, I'm not arguing that Pedro Pascal is playing the Maker, right? He's just secretly a villain. Although that would be an incredible plot twist at the end of this movie if it turned out he was a bad guy the whole time. Instead, I think the Fantastic Four film is doing the inverse of what the Maker did. So for those of you guys who aren't following the Ultimate Universe, or you are, and you maybe find yourself a little bit lost, that the Maker comes from the original Ultimate Universe in Marvel Comics, the one that was destroyed in the lead up to Secret Wars 2015 during the incursions. And in fact, there's only two individuals in the Marvel Universe that survive from the Ultimate Universe. There is the Maker, and then there's Miles Morales. And one of the coolest things was that the Maker actually invited Miles to go with him on the journey to try to find or recreate the new Ultimate Universe. Anyway, the Maker, being a villainous version of Reed Richards, travels to this reality called Earth 6160. And then he starts modifying everybody's history. And so in that reality, he changes things. So Peter Parker never gets bitten by the radioactive spider. Captain America's never discovered and thawed out when he was frozen in ice, all that kind of stuff. And then he just kind of starts reworking everything behind the scenes in order to provide absolute power for himself. Now, again, I don't think that's what's happening in this movie. I don't think that Pedro Pascal and the Fantastic Four are secretly manipulating things behind the scenes because they just want to attain some level of godhood or something like that. What I would argue is this, that when the Fantastic Four ended up traveling the multiverse or whatever it is that basically sent them to this reality, that's how they got their powers. They kind of ended up arriving in this universe with abilities, and then they just did superhero stuff. And over time, their popularity rose. But because of the intelligence of Reed Richards, they forever altered the trajectory of this universe. And so with Reed Richards' intelligence, basically they ushered in this kind of era of a scientific age. And so that's why the Fantastic Four are so incredibly popular in this universe. They're not just superheroes who do some things, right? I mean, it's one thing when you look at superheroes, right? In like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thor taking selfies with people or something like that. But they're more just kind of like content creators, right? Just maybe minor celebrities, as opposed to like these great big huge things where like the world's throwing parades for them and all kinds of crazy stuff, because clearly the world adores the Fantastic Four in this film, or at least that seems to be the case. And so because they are essentially high profile celebrities, it stands to reason that Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four, kind of the reason why this universe progressed the way that it did, why it's reached the scientific age of enlightenment. But then the question becomes this: how does Galactus and how do all these characters tie into the film? How does Doctor Doom tie into this film? Well, that's where things get really interesting, I think. So one of the big prevailing theories here in the Fantastic Four film is that from the trailer, there's a scene where there's that just gigantic explosion in space. And a lot of people are kind of like, this is an incursion. A lot of people are saying like, that's the result of an incursion and that Earth was being destroyed. Now, maybe it was being destroyed by the Fantastic Four, maybe it was being destroyed by the government, or maybe it was destroyed by Galactus on his way to Earth, right? But let's just kind of go with that idea and say that it's an incursion. Well, then that answers the question to the consequences of the Fantastic Four being there, because we know over the course of the MCU that incursions are a result of multiversal travel, that essentially everyone is almost like attached to their universe by strings, for lack of a better word. And when you leave your reality in any form and travel to another, you're actually pulling your universe with you. Now, this is a terrible analogy to use, but again, it gets the point across. And that if you stay in one particular place for too long, you will actually pull your Earth to that other Earth, and they will ultimately collide with each other. We know that happened when Stephen Strange in the Illuminati universe, what is it, Earth 838, I think it was traveling through the multiverse, trying to see how it was that Thanos was defeated in any other reality, so on and so forth. And so if the Fantastic Four are from a different reality, and potentially they've been staving off incursions, right, just because of their presence in this universe, then the question becomes this: how do they get back? Have they ever tried to get back? And the answer to that question, I think, is yes. But because of the fact that they can't just hop through the multiverse, or because they don't want to get lost in the multiverse, or maybe they enjoy the life of being celebrities right here on this planet, that what Reed Richards did, and maybe even just outright efficiency, is he created the bridge. Now, what's the bridge in Marvel Comics? A lot of you guys who are familiar with Hickman's Fantastic Four and Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, you know about this. But for the people who don't, the bridge is basically a window into other realities, right? Like flipping through TV channels, Reed Richards can actually flip through different universes. He can see what's happening in other universes across the multiverse. Now, he can also create parameters, right? So when the bridge was first introduced during Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run as part of Dark Reign, I think he started creating these parameters where he was just like, okay, show me all universes where the superheroes were engaged in a civil war. And it's like, okay, here are all the universes, and here's how the Civil War turned out. Okay, well then, of all the universes that were engaged in a civil war, show me the ones where Captain America's side won. And he could just kind of continue on and on and on and on by adding these parameters and literally filtering down universes for a particular cause. But depending on what was going on at the time they left their universe, right? So if Hank Pym was still a thing, right? Or if Howard Stark was popular at that point in time, maybe they can use those little things as anchors. Or it could simply just be that there's so many realities out there with a Howard Stark. There's so many realities out there with a Hank Pym. And there's so many variables that it's just not possible to narrow it down to the main Marvel universe. So they never quite find a way home. But if that's the case, how would they end up back in the main Marvel universe, presumably leading up to Secret Wars and all that kind of stuff? That I haven't quite figured out yet. And it could be any number of factors here. Maybe Galactus isn't from that universe. And, as we mentioned in a previous video, that he is looking for the Fantastic Four and their son Franklin because of the vast powers that he will have one day to basically bring his universe back or to send Galactus back to his universe. Maybe Franklin is the key for how the Fantastic Four actually get back, that with basically Franklin's abilities, they can actually jump through different realities much faster than they normally would. It could be because of everything going on, that maybe Doctor Doom is operating behind the scenes. He's already wiped out the Council of Kangs. He's making his move to seize control of the multiverse, that the TVA come to see the Fantastic Four and enlist them, and that's how the Fantastic Four become a part of everything. But if that's the case and you are invoking the TVA, it also raises other questions, right? We know the TVA is not too keen on people jumping from one reality to the next and being in places that they're not supposed to be. And so if that's the case, why wouldn't they have stopped the Fantastic Four before? Okay, so I just realized I never recorded the segment on Doctor Doom, and it's the next morning, so my voice sounds a little bit deeper than it did in the other part of the video. But here's the funny thing about Doctor Doom and the way I view things in the Fantastic Four film and how he's involved. When it comes to Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom, when he was initially introduced to us at San Diego Comic-Con, the Russo brothers came out and they said it's not some variant of Tony Stark or anything like that. It really is Doctor Doom. And now information is coming out that Marvel's kind of backpedaling, right? Because fan reception to that was not nearly as exciting as they thought it would be. That they thought people would be just over the top enamored to see RDJ return. But instead, people are just kind of like, look, he had his time. Unless you're going to bring him back as Iron Man in some capacity, don't bring him back at all. Like, give that to somebody else. And so now information's coming out where supposedly Marvel's going to say, okay, it's not actually Victor Von Doom. It is a variant of Tony Stark. But if it is, how do you square that circle? Well, the one thing to remember is that Marvel loves simplicity, right? Marvel loves to make information within movies easily digestible. And so if we say that Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom finds his origin within the Fantastic Four, then what's the easiest way to explain that? Well, let's look at Tony Stark as a really, really good starting off point, right? Look at Iron Man 1. What was Tony Stark at the beginning of Iron Man 1? He was a narcissist, playboy. He didn't really care about anybody but himself. He just enjoyed his billions, and he was the head of Stark Industries, which made weapons, and people died because of it, and so on and so forth. It wasn't until he was caught in an ambush in the Middle East, and he saw his very own weapons that he designed killing innocent people that he turned over a new leaf. He developed the Iron Man armor, became a superhero. Nick Fury told him, you're part of a much larger world, and the rest is history. But what if that never happened? Right? What if that ambush never happened and Tony Stark never had a reason to turn over a new leaf? Tony Stark stayed the narcissistic playboy that he's always been, or at least always was up to that point in Iron Man 1. And if you remember that interview, right, with the girl from Vanity Fair that he ended up banging, that she asked him, what do you think about your other nickname, the Merchant of Death? Right? What if it just kind of plays out a little bit different and the words are changed a smidge, right? What do you think about your other nickname, right? I don't know, the Harbinger of Doom, or something that probably sounds more interesting within the film. That Tony Stark could easily reply, well, I've got a doctorate. So if you're going to call me something like that, at least respect my intelligence and my education. Call me Dr. Doom, right? And just leans into the idea. And so him being Dr. Doom doesn't really come from the fact that his name is Victor Von Doom and he has a doctorate. And so that's why he's Dr. Doom. Instead, that's a name that the world basically gave to him because he is a manufacturer of weapons, death and destruction, right? Doom follows him everywhere he goes. Now, how he ties into the Fantastic Four and everything, I don't fully know, but truth to tell, when it comes to Victor, his motivations are always very, very simple. And in Marvel, there were two eras of why Doctor Doom did the kind of things that he did. In the first era, the very beginnings of his character, you ended up learning in the story Triumph and Torment that he was always trying to attain absolute power to free his mother's soul from the realm of Mephisto. But after that was done, then Doctor Doom did all the stuff that he did because Doctor Doom is just a jerk, truth to tell. He's just always trying to attain absolute power. And in fact, his answer for that was solidified in Doom War when he stole all the vibranium from Wakanda. And you ended up learning that he does what he does because he legitimately believes that he alone can make the world better, which we ended up finding out that was not the case. And he admitted that willingly during Secret Wars 2015 when he was fighting Reed Richards. So again, it's kind of like a 3-act narrative for the motivations of Victor Von Doom. But even in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, when Reed Richards met the Council of Reeds, and they showed him all the good things that they do across the multiverse and so on and so forth, but then they showed him the bad things. And they said that in every universe where Doctor Doom basically turns into a villain and tries to seize absolute control, that they lobotomize him. Because Doctor Doom is not complicated. He's the most dangerous threat that any universe faces because his quest for power, his thirst for power is insatiable. So take those things and let's just throw them on to this variant of Tony Stark in the Fantastic Four universe, who is in effect Doctor Doom. Well, then he becomes much simpler. If by whatever manner and whatever means he learns about the nature of the multiverse from Reed Richards, well, then at that point, it's just a mad grab for power. And whatever his motivation is, whatever his desires are within the context of this film that lead him down the path of villainy, just kind of get expanded on, right? And it's just like, okay, now he's going out in the multiverse to do that thing, right? He maybe learns about the Kangs and it's like, I can take over the dynasty and I can conquer the multiverse. I mean, Marvel does kind of have a history of taking what could be incredibly complex and incredibly deep villains and just kind of condensing them down to these thin 2-dimensional pieces of paper that are easily defeated over the course of a 2.5-hour film, right? So again, it's not wildly exciting. There's not some great big huge, I guess dramatic reveal that's made to the audience. Marvel spoiled that during San Diego. Instead, it's really just more of a simpler way to introduce Victor, or I guess Doctor Doom, into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, truth to tell, I think that because Robert Downey Jr. is going to cost so much money, that Marvel can't keep him around long term. So I think honestly he'll die either during the events of Doomsday or during the events of Secret Wars. And I think he'll be killed by the real Doctor Doom, by the actual Victor Von Doom, who does not suffer pretenders. You guys know that in Marvel Comics. Like, there's a story in, I think it was Christopher Cantwell's Doom miniseries or solo series, right? Volume 2, where Victor Von Doom and the Blue Marvel Adam Brashear go to this alternate reality. And they encounter a version of Doctor Doom who was a good guy, who actually made the world better. And what you saw the Fantastic Four doing in the film is basically what Doctor Doom did in this alternate reality. And the main Marvel Universe Doctor Doom took an ultimate nullifier, right? A device capable of eradicating anything and everything, making it so it never existed. And he obliterates this guy's entire universe because he's like, Doctor Doom would never do something so foolish. That's ridiculous, right? So again, Doctor Doom's not complicated. It's pretty straightforward and it's pretty basic, with his character. So again, it's not overly exciting. It's not some great big huge grandiose thing, but I think it is a simple way to bring Victor in to the MCU. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, right? Let me know how you guys feel about this whole thing with the Fantastic Four theory and Doctor Doom, Galactus, and all that kind of cool stuff. And I will catch you all later. Peace.